My name is Janis. I'm Oglala Lakota from Pine Ridge Reservation. I am in Anishinaabe territory, who was historically our enemies. And we fought some of the most brutal and bloody wars in this continent, bar none. And over time, there were a lot of Anishinaabe and Dakota men and women who gave their lives to make peace with each other. And it's from this perspective that I stand up here today, standing on the shoulders of those men and women who work so diligently and so hard to make peace with each other. And you don't understand what that means unless you really understand the nature of relationships with each other, and relationships with this earth. And it's these relationships that bring me here today. The relationship with my wife over, 36 years? 37 years? I lost count. My relationship with Joe, who's a good man. When you sit down and talk to him, you better be prepared to spend a couple hours listening to story after story, which is a good thing. And the many other people that are here today, people that I've just met. I spent some time talking about this because the very essential core of Rights of Nature is about our relationship with the earth. And in talking about these themes, my thoughts specifically about Rights of Nature is to talk broadly about this so-called Rights of Nature movement, right? Which doesn't really exist in this country. It's an international phenomenon, right? In this country, and I may curse from time to time, but this country doesn't give a fuck about nature in that perspective. Nature is something to be owned and to be utilized. As the owner of that property, you can do basically whatever you want with that property, right? The kind of very core of what this country is in its relationship with this earth is about ownership and control. And so this idea of a Rights of Nature movement existing internationally within this world, in this time, is an important phenomenon. That's why we're bringing this up here tonight, right? This is a real movement that is happening internationally. That this country, number one, needs to have a better understanding of, and number two, needs to be willing to move its legal infrastructure toward. And thus far, we have been unwilling to do so. So I wanted to spend a little time to talk about the broader Rights of Nature movement. Secondly, I wanted to take time to talk about what's happening here. White Earth as a tribe, right? It exists as a sovereign entity that is part of a coalition or a federation of tribes that have joined together as the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, right? It is the Minnesota Chippewa tribe that is the overarching sovereign entity within which White Earth Tribe is a member. And similar to the various states that make up the United States, these various tribal entities that make up the Minnesota Chippewa tribe have sovereign authority within their own territories to establish their own rules and laws. One of those laws established here on White Earth is a law recognizing that Monoman wild rice has legally enforceable rights, rights of Monoman. That has happened here on White Earth in December 2018, I believe. So right at the very end of the year then. No, 2020, right? So for 2 years, White Earth has been operating under this Rights of Monoman legislation and is now moving forward in a couple of different ways. And in talking about this Rights of Monoman, legislation, we're going to talk about what we are doing at the NIBI Center with the White Earth Division of Natural Resources and White Earth community members to kind of develop a deeper understanding of what this rights and monomen legislation means within the community and how it will be implemented moving forward. What it means for the community, what it means for different divisions, what it means for the legal standards, and what kind of changes this actually means and how it's going to be implemented. So we're working on that right now. So that's the second topic of conversation. The third topic of conversation, I think, is maybe most important of all for this audience. And that I think has to go to, what does this mean to us? Is rights of nature something that's relevant to my life? Is rights of nature something that I can make a decision tonight to commit part of my life towards? Is it something that has any kind of meaning to me during this period of time in this country when we are so divided and hurtful towards each other, right? When I think about the Uvalde schools, and I think about what we have done to each other in a variety of different ways, and how this idea of a relationship can start in a different way. That it can start with us as we stand on this land, breathing the air that is gifted to us, not by us, but by the nature around us. And if Earth is giving us this gift of life, what requirement, what obligation do we have to give back to her? What is the nature of that relationship? And what are we willing to do to follow through on that? I told somebody earlier that I was going to cry at least 3 times tonight. Yeah, this is the first one. So, if that's okay, I mean, I can run through those 3 topics in 5 minutes. Or we can spend as much time as we want tonight. I'm here. I want to also do this in a way where anything anybody here wants to say or any question you might have, please do not hesitate. Right? The audio, the sound quality might be difficult, so you might have to shout out a little bit or come up and take the mic. But I want this to be a dialogue as much as possible. The other caveat to this whole thing is Joe wants to make sure that we talk about treaties. But the only way we're going to talk about treaties tonight if Joe comes up here, stands in front of you, and talks about treaties himself. No, but we'll talk about treaties too as a part of this. So, if that's okay, everybody's in agreement with that? Yes? Okay. All right. Good. So, the broader rights of nature movement, right? So, I had the fortune a couple years ago of spending a month in Ecuador. Ecuador was the first country that established a national constitutional provision recognizing rights of nature in its constitution, that nature has legally enforceable right, the right to exist, the right to thrive. Ecuador established this in its constitution, applicable to the whole country. Their follow-up was supposed to be a set of regulatory mechanisms that directed their natural resources divisions, commerce divisions, other divisions on what that new constitutional provisions means for their regulatory mechanisms. Corporations intervened. The country did nothing to establish these new regulatory reforms. Nothing. Corporations intervened and stopped it. After that, there were a number of different commercial enterprises that destroyed the environment. Community members stepped in and sued those operations in order to force them under court to respect the rights of nature provisions. The first one that went to the Supreme Court of Ecuador was upheld by the Ecuador Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said the Constitution of Ecuador is the supreme law of the land. You cannot ignore these rights of nature's provisions. You must enforce them and apply them. And in this particular case, that means X, Y, Z, right? A shitty way to do business. There should have been regulatory mechanisms that were the desired effect, but the courts are the ones, fortunately, having a Supreme Court leadership that had that kind of integrity. And so that's how Ecuador is applying it, right? It's not satisfactory. It's not fully what the indigenous peoples meant whenever they pushed and fought to establish this, but it is the way it's playing out, right? That's one example of what's happening in another country. In another country, it happens in a variety of different mechanisms. In New Zealand, the Maori had some treaty negotiations and attempt to protect a particular ecosystem. And as a part of those treaty negotiations, they designed a mechanism whereby that ecosystem was recognized as having legally enforceable rights. And the Maori people that were negotiating that were a part of the enforcement mechanism of it, right? And it happened in a variety of other places, in several dozen other places, right? Some at a broad level with constitutional provisions that apply to the whole country, others that applied to a particular rivershed or ecosystem, others that applied to a very specific sort of location. Oftentimes, here in the United States, a municipality. Here in the United States, maybe a dozen municipalities have established these kind of provisions. None of them are enforceable because of US law. Maybe 6 tribes have established a similar sort of provision. White Earth is the first one that is actually implemented in both regulatory mechanisms and through litigation, right? And so it's happening in a relatively broad way here in the United States. Internationally, it's happening in a very dynamic way. This is a real movement. This is a real dynamic. So much so that the United Nations has established a 7-year conversation about the rights of nature and come up with a number of different declarations and documents that are not enforceable or have signatories, but it's recognition of a normative standards that's developing within international human rights and global rights mechanisms, right? This idea of a normative standard is more important than it sounds, right? This is the way these types of provisions become enforceable in a broader way, right? So it's an important part of this process. Coming back to the United States, there has been no breakthrough whatsoever. There has been no legal breakthrough either in the courts or in the legislative process. There is barely a breakthrough in public commentary, just barely, right? We're just now starting to talk about this in a real way. And that's a problem, right? What Joe and I wanted to do was not only work on rights of nature movement from a local perspective, and I don't mean Joe and I mean the whole organization of the Nibby Center, right? Because this is a really solid group of people and a solid community organization. But we not only wanted to work on it at a local level within White Earth on rights of annulment, but we want to engage this conversation broadly at a national level and an international level. So, but our thinking is, in order to really have something to say, you got to ground yourself in something that is present and build a relationship that is personal and deep. And so we were fortunate to be on White Earth, where White Earth has established a rights of annulment provision. This rights of annulment provision was lobbied for, and a bunch of it drafted by Winona LaDuke's organization, who's no longer here right now. But if she was here, we would give her the appropriate recognition and a standing ovation, because that's the quality of work that they did, right? So the rights of annulment provision was passed here on White Earth, and it just sat on their books for a couple of years. And we wanted to work with the Division of Natural Resources and people across the community who have deep and personal knowledge about ricing and monomen. And so what we did is pull together a group of 5 indigenous elder women within the community who are deeply well respected. And we asked them to identify the number of individuals in the community who had the deepest knowledge about wild rice, about monomen and the process of ricing, and what ricing meant for the community. And so we interviewed about 20 people over the course of about 8 months, right during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, right? When we knew nothing about it. So we did a lot of them by Zoom. We did a lot of them social distancing outside when we could. But we interviewed these people. And from those interviews, we learned 3 or 4 critical issues. One is that if the tribe is going to do anything to truly enforce the rights of monomen provision, they have to recognize that people who live within those communities where monomen is growing are the people that are going to have the deepest relationship with monomen. That enforcement, management, and engagement with the rights of monomen provision has to be locally based as much as possible. And so we made sure that those were a key part of the regulatory provisions that we drafted. Secondly, they told us that within that mechanism and that process, it was critical for elders to have true voices of authority. That within that mechanism, not the tribal government, but the local folks who really knew monomen were the ones who should be saying when the monomen was ready for ricing and when it should be closed, when they were damaged and when they were healthy, and what the process should be for moving forward with that. So really empowering the local community members as a part of that mechanism as well. And then thirdly, they recognized and told us that people really want to know. But the information that's out there about what are the potential sources of damage or harm to monomen, what are the future threats, what are the current threats, what are the real issues that are going on, the lack of transparency is a real problem within this community and every community. And so they wanted to make sure that the community was informed as much as possible, recognizing that a lot of this information might be available and out there already, but that it's not getting into the community. So how does transparency change itself from some information that's just available to everybody to information that is crafted in a way and made available in the community and shared with the community in the way that they could actually take it in and make meaning out of it? How is that process different from simply putting the data and information up on a website and making sure that it's available? So really thinking through what transparency means within the needs of a particular community and working with the regulatory mechanisms to make that happen. So what we've done is put together some draft regulations with the Division of Natural Resources, and we're in the process of now having finalized that, of getting that before the tribal government as a part of their lawmaking process. So that's what we've done, in the rights of monomen legislation. It's a very local sort of process. It's very much designed to fit with what's happening here on White Earth and to be applied and implemented here on White Earth, not anyplace else. But we're thinking that the more we do that and both fail and succeed, right? Because this shit that we put together is good, but it's not that good, right? And people are going to see it and they're going to think, this is bullshit, right? We got to change this, we got to change that, and we have to be open to that process. And we have to be open to learning. This is what we did right, this is where we fucked up, right? And learn from that process. And in that learning, we as an organization, this community as a community of people, are going to begin to develop a deeper relationship with monomen and a deeper relationship with the land. And that's the kind of process that we're committed to. And that's the kind of work that we're trying to do. And that's how we think that we will learn as an organization what is the best way to participate in a rights of nature discussion, to facilitate a rights of nature movement here within this country. So that's our thinking, That's about it. That's kind of where we're going with that, So we're really locally focused. We're not trying to pitch ourselves out there on a national or international level right now, but that is our intent. That is where we're going to go. So,
How does it?
How
does it?
I didn't understand.
How does it? Well, everyone in this room will help you.
All right, good. So one of the things that makes this difficult is my hearing is steadily going bad. After being married for so long. Yeah.
When you mentioned the Department of Natural Resources, are you referring to an organization within White Earth, or are you referring to the Minnesota Department?
No, we're talking about the White Earth department that manages natural resources. And just to put that into context, right? And this is one of the things that I tend to get on a horse and ride a little bit, right? But the way U.S. law treats Indian nations, indigenous nations, within reservation boundaries, White Earth has control, or is Indian land, of maybe 7% of the land base within the reservation. Over 90% of the land base has been either stolen or taken or some otherwise removed from tribal ownership and tribal control. It is owned by non-Indians in fee simple title. What that means, the Supreme Court said that if a non-Indian person on a reservation boundary is on lands that is not quote unquote Indian land or trust land, the tribe has no jurisdiction over them, either civil or regulatory. And part of that is just pure racism. Justice Rehnquist in 79 or so was a Supreme Court justice at the time. And there was a criminal case out of Seattle someplace, or Washington State. And a non-Indian did something within reservation boundaries, but within reservation boundaries. It was pure Indian land. And it's in Oliphant versus Squamish. And Rehnquist said, Indian people cannot have jurisdiction over white people purely because of race. That white people are superior to Indians, that white people should not have to subject themselves to the decision-making jurisdictional authority of Indian people. Purely racist. Supported with precedent in the Supreme Court that were in the 1800s. Just purely racist decision-making that is the basis of law that is applied to Indian people today. That is the law. Purely racist. No other reason for it. And that standard is what White Earth has to deal with today. So in looking at the application of these regulations for rights of annulment, we have to split it into three different parts. The first is within reservation on the less than 10% of lands that are actually Indian lands within reservation boundaries of White Earth. The lands that the tribe truly has jurisdictional authority over. That is the fullest extent that we can push the kind of standards and mechanisms that fully respect rights of annulment. We can do that, and we're gonna do that, right? Within the 90+% of land that is within reservation boundary, that according to all of these US Supreme Court decision and federal plenary power, the tribe does not have full jurisdictional authority, but kind of a quasi-partial sort of a thing. We're gonna push that as much as we can and challenge those laws and challenge those standards and challenge the city of Mahnomen or whoever to respect these standards and negotiate an agreement And we'll have a deep understanding of what the law says we can and can't do. And we'll have strategies for implementing the rights of Menominee legislation fully as possible. And then the third level is outside of the reservation. Recognizing that Menominee doesn't decide where it's going to grow based upon reservation boundaries. Menominee is going to grow where it's going to grow. Menominee is going to demand that it be respected wherever it grows. That is the nature of rights of Menominee. This is the second time. And so we're going to develop legal strategies for how we can implement this rights of Menominee legislation outside of reservation boundaries. Number one, within traditional treaty territories. Territories that are negotiated between different Ojibwe communities and the U.S. government. Within which those treaties, Ojibwe people preserve the right to gather the resources that were important to their cultural and traditional health and well-being. That also means the right to make sure and ensure that those resources are managed and protected effectively, right? Those are the arguments that we're making within that, right? Outside of those treaty territories, where Menominee also grows, we're going to develop strategies for protecting that as well. So this is very expansive. It's going to have 3 different strategies, and that's our work. Yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool stuff. Anyway, any questions, any thoughts, any comments? All right, so the real conversation, and this is not something that I can speak to. I'm going to ask you guys to say something as well. What does it matter? What does this mean to you? What is the purpose of this? Why the fuck are you here? You know? You're here for a reason. You're here because something has brought you here, not just your mom or somebody else. Right? You're here in a way that belies your own intentionality. Right? Sometimes shit happens that we don't intend. Sometimes it happens because it has meaning and depth and purpose. Sometimes there's other spirits and other beings that are moving us in a particular way. That prayer that I made, that prayer was about us, about the request that we have in being here. This is not a ceremony. This is not a specific thing that we're asking the spirits to give me something. Spirits, give me, give me a vision. Give me health. Give me healing. Whatever it is. Give me good numbers for the bingo or something. Right? This is a ceremony in its own way. This is a ceremony where food is prepared in a particular way. People are brought together to commune, to be, to share, and to heal. We are asking the spirits to be a part of that. Here, now. That dish was made as a way of giving back because we knew all these couple days that the spirits have been here helping us, giving us, providing us, directing us. That dish was important. That dish tells those spirits, we recognize you. Thank you. We know that you have helped us and you have gifted us. Please accept this in return. A small thing from us to give back for so much that you've given to us. All right? So whether you say anything here or not, think about this. What does this mean to you? What are you willing to do for the earth? What are you willing to do for your grandma? What are you willing to give, to sacrifice? What meaning and purpose within your life? All right? I don't really have anything to say about that. That's up to y'all. But this is not free. You know? If there's anything in your life that you can sacrifice a little bit for, it's for this land that you walk on. Okay. Thanks.